Welcome to Conlang diachrony as we continue our series about building sound changes for our constructed languages. Today we're going to be talking about vowel changes. This is largely still going to be concerned with changing segments, assimilation and dissimilation, although we'll talk a little bit about losing segments, that's deletion, as well as adding a segment or epenthesis. Now you might wonder why I'm doing a special video about vowels, and there's a couple of reasons for this. The first is that vowels tend to be a little bit squishier than consonants, and so while consonants tend to change a little bit more predictably, a little bit more in standard ways, vowels can be a little bit more all over the place. This is also because vowels tend to be less stable over time than consonants, although this doesn't bear out in every instance that we've seen. Finally, with vowels especially, the motivation for change is often a lot less obvious than it is with consonants. There may be assimilation going on, but it's going to be harder to pick out exactly what is motivating the change. So there's a whole bunch of different types of vowel change. We're not going to go through each one in depth, but I'll try to give you some examples of each. There's raising vowels, where a vowel goes from a lower position in the mouth to a higher position. Conversely, a vowel can be lowered. Vowels can be moved to the front of the mouth, or they can move further back in the mouth. Vowels can be rounded or unrounded. Vowels can also move more to the center of the mouth. This is often associated with the idea of reduction. Vowels can be lengthened. This is sometimes referred to as tensing, although that's typically when it's accompanied by a movement of the tongue root as well. Similarly, vowels can be shortened, often called laxing, although again, that's usually when it's paired with some kind of movement of the tongue root. Vowels can also be diphthongized or monophthongized. Coalescence can also occur when two vowels in hiatus merge into a single vowel. Reduction is when a vowel tends to move towards the center and be less distinct, less pronounced. As we said in the past, multiple types of these vowel changes can occur. Once again, these usually occur one after the other, but synchronically they look like they're happening at the same time. In our sound changes, we can potentially have it be a single sound change for our conlangs. In this Latin example, we see that the E is both backed and rounded. In this example, it is backed, rounded, and raised. And in this example, we have diphthongization and lengthening of the vowel. As I said at the beginning of this video, sometimes the motivation for these sound changes can be a little bit more opaque, but there are certain contexts for changes that come up more often than not. The most obvious is when they are directly assimilating or dissimilating from a nearby vowel sound. Stress can also be a context for many of these changes. Stress vowels tend to be longer, tenser, more peripheral, that is, further from the center. They tend to be higher, and they have a tendency towards diphthongization. On the other hand, unstressed vowels tend to be shorter and more centralized. This is often referred to as reduction and may end in deletion altogether. Vowels may also change simply based on where they are in a word, such as if they're the first vowel to occur or the final vowel of a word. Syllable structure can also play a role in vowel changes. This can most often be seen in affecting vowel length. Heavier codas tend to lead to shorter vowels, and lighter codas tend to lead to longer vowels. This, of course, isn't true in every language, but it's a good enough tendency to be aware of. You can see this in this example from English. Diphthongization and monophthongization can also exaggerate this length distinction. Similar effects may result from consonant clusters in general. In this example, the coda cluster is the same size in both of these examples, but because there's an additional vowel, it both shortens and laxes the vowel. Also, whenever vowels are found in hiatus, there's a good chance that change is going to occur. The various dialects of Basque particularly exemplify this change. With definite nouns, they have an A added to the end. When this happens, vowels often end up in hiatus, and different dialects of Basque deal with this in different ways. Sometimes dissimilation happens to make the two vowels next to each other more distinct. Other times you might have glide formation, where one of the vowels turns into a glide. Or glide insertion, a kind of epenthesis between the two vowels. This can be followed by a kind of glide strengthening, that fortition that we've talked about previously. You can also just have coalescence, where the two vowels merge into one. Finally, whenever a sound is deleted, the nearby vowels may be affected. Most often the vowel is lengthened. This is called compensatory lengthening. The examples are shown here. A couple of concluding observations before we get to how exactly to use this in conlanging. Vowels seem to be the Wild West of sound changes. Any vowel can become just about any other vowel with very little justification actually needed. The phonological structure seems to be key. So how can we use this for our conlangs? I'm going to start in a slightly different spot this time than I have in our previous videos, because I think the first thing we need to do when talking about vowel changes is analyze our language structure for likely context for change. We're going to want to consider the stress pattern of our proto-language, the syllable weight that seems to be most expected, how common consonant clusters are, whether or not things can occur in hiatus, and when we do this, we should probably start simple and grow from there, have a plan, and consider both phonemes and allophones. Once we have that ready to go, we should think about our bread and butter. Vowel changes around stress are likely going to happen to some extent in every language. If it doesn't, that's going to be cause for some amount of uniqueness. Similarly, vowels are very likely to be either lengthened or shortened based on whether there are clusters following it. Again, you don't have to do either of these, but these are going to be very common, and most languages will do this, at least on an allophonic level. For your meat and potatoes, I think some of the more common changes, the most useful changes, are going to be fronting, rounding, centralization, and a combination of backing and rounding. This isn't to say that other changes are less likely. However, these are going to be a pretty good bet for using in most conlangs. Vowel change is especially useful for creating allophonic and dialectual variation. The subtle sound changes that you can create can make words that sound almost the same but are a little bit different from one another. It's also useful for creating daughter languages that have a strong family resemblance. This is based purely on my own observations and doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of backing, but it does seem as though people pay more attention to the consonants of a word. And so if you have two words in two different languages with the same consonants but different vowels, those words are going to look related, and thus those languages are going to look related, even if there's pretty wide variation in the vowels. Finally, we move on to our case study. Our first language, target lang, in which we're going to be aiming for a particular phonology, has a lot of different vowels. Most notably, we have those front rounded vowels. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity to create vowels and mess with the vowel systems. We're not going to talk about vowel harmony today. That's going to be taken up in a later video. Where we're starting from is a proto-lang that only has 3 vowels. So we're going to have to do a lot of finagling to produce all of those vowels. Let's start by analyzing the structure of the proto-lang. First, we have penultimate stress, so that's going to be more consistent. Syllables can be opened or closed, and clusters of 2 to 3 consonants are actually fairly common. But there is no hiatus, so we don't want to make any changes that depend on vowels in hiatus, at least not without deleting medial consonants. The first thing I want to do is play around with that stress. We're going to reduce pre- and post-tonic vowels. We'll start by saying that any vowel that ends a word, any vowel that is unstressed that ends a word, is simply deleted. Since we have penultimate stress, this means effectively any vowel that ends a word will be deleted. We'll also say that high vowels become mid when they precede a stressed vowel. This is going to be one of the first ways we can come up with of increasing our vowel inventory. We also should probably say that stressed vowels are lengthened. We might mess around with that a little bit later because I think I want length to be a distinguishing feature, but we'll leave this in for now. We should also modify vowel length with respect to clusters. Since this language is going to have a lot of variation in clusters, this could produce some interesting results. So a vowel will become long when it's in an open syllable, and it will become short when it has 2 consonants in the coda. And vowels will monophthongize when they are followed by a sequence of 3 consonants or 2 consonants and the word's end. While we're at it, let's throw in that when we have 2 vowels of the same type next to each other, it becomes long. Technically, we've already been saying that they're long, but we might as well throw that rule in so we make sure that we get everything noted consistently, regardless of which form we put our input in. Finally, I still do want to expand a little bit our vowel inventory, those raising and lowering. So we're going to throw in a whole bunch of rules here. Essentially, a vowel in the first syllable of a word is going to move towards the height of the second vowel. You can work through exactly how all of these work. Notice in our second and fourth example, the way that this interacts with our first rule about lowering pretonic vowels. That's enough for us to start with. Again, we might do more, but this gives us some working changes. So now we can move on to freelang, the language where we don't have a particular target in mind, we're just applying changes and seeing what sticks. We'll start with doing an unstressed centralization. So unstressed vowels are going to move a little bit more towards the center. They're going to be a little bit laxer, and they're going to be a little bit less distinctive. We'll also do a lengthening or shortening based on the presence or absence of clusters. I think we'll also just simplify diphthongs across the board, which is how we're going to get mid-vowels. I like mid-vowels, so I'm always looking for a way to add them in. These are the sources that I used in making this video. In our next video, we're going to talk about what Trask refers to as whole segment changes, where instead of changing the particular features of a segment, the whole segment itself is either added in, deleted, or moved around within a word. Until next time, be conlanging.